2023 memo from the Department of Homeland Security shows that over 270 suspected illegal marijuana growing operations in Maine that were linked to the Chinese regime were possibly generating billions in revenue. The bipartisan group sent a letter to the AG, Merrick Garland, last week expressing their concerns. They want to know how many marijuana farms are being allegedly run by Chinese nationals, especially those with the potential tie to the Chinese Communist Party. And they believe that thousands of illicit Chinese marijuana growing operations pose a direct threat to public safety, human rights, and national security. In some cases, the grow operators also engage in human trafficking, forced labor, drug trafficking, and violent crime. Lawmakers say most of the illegal pot farms can be found in states with legalized or relaxed marijuana laws. The Chinese market is bracing against yet another blow, with stock prices plunging in recent days. To voice their anger, Chinese people are flocking to an unexpected part of social media, the official Weibo account of the U.S. Embassy in Beijing. NTD's Dave Martin has more.
Weibo is China's most popular microblogging site, often billed as the country's version of X. And lately, 140,000 comments have been glued onto a Friday post made by the American Embassy in Beijing. The post focused on the conservation of wild giraffes, but the comments zeroed in on economic woes. Here are a few of them. One user wrote, "We know they are lying. They know they are lying. They know that we know they are lying, and we also know that they know we know they are lying. But they are still lying. Could you tell me which prosperous country the above statement describes?" Another added, "Do you want to protect me too? Giraffes are life, so am I." While one of the over 15,000 reposts asks the embassy, quote, "Could you spare us some missiles to bomb away the Shanghai Stock Exchange?" The post was later deleted, and users turned their attention towards the Weibo of the Indian embassy in China, with some leaving comments like, "I'm so envious of the Indian Stock Exchange. It's amazing. And great country, great financial market. Thumbs up to you." Others praised Indian Prime Minister Modi. Some users reported that their Weibo accounts and other linked social media accounts had been blocked after leaving the comments. Chinese authorities...
If you could, tell us what's exactly inside of this bill and some of the pushback that you're seeing from lawmakers.
Hi, Steve. Good to be here with you. So this bill obviously allocates money for the southern border as well as Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan. We want to show you the exact breakdown of how this money is allocated. So take notice of the $118 billion, there's $60 billion for Ukraine. That's triple the money spent on the border at just $20 billion. Now, keep in mind, it also addresses policy changes at the southern border, such as raising the standard for illegal immigrants to be able to claim asylum. It also adjusts the president's parole authority, and it gives the DHS new authorization to shut down the border after a total number of 5,000 illegal crossings happen every day consecutively over a week's time. Now, both Senate leaders from both parties acknowledge this bill as a good step forward, saying that it's urgent and the need to act now. We'll take a look at what the Senate leaders had to say.
The gaping hole in our nation's sovereign borders on President Biden's watch is not going to heal itself.
Leader McConnell and I, who disagree on many issues, have never worked so closely together on legislation as we did on this.
Now, this close cooperation with Democrats has caused outrage among many Senate Republicans. Senator Josh Hawley, for example, accusing Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell of caring more about working with Senate Leader Chuck Schumer than he cares about working with Senate Republicans. Now, there's a number of Republican senators who are on the record now saying they'll oppose this bill once it does come up to the floor for a vote later this week. Right now, there's around 20 Republican senators saying that they'll oppose it, as well as a few Democrats. Now, here's a tweet from Eric Schmidt that sums up the messaging that we've heard from the majority of Republican senators. He said, "This bill is worse than advertised." He said, "We need 41 senators to stand firm to prevent this bill from being jammed through." Now, many are taking issue with several of the provisions that address border policy changes, but last night, after this text was released, the lead negotiator here, Senator James Lankford, aimed to fend off some of this criticism, telling reporters that he feels this is a strong step moving forward and would force the president to take action now, as well as give future presidents the authority that they need to secure the border. But he also acknowledged that this bill will not address the millions of illegal immigrants that are currently in the country and came here since Biden took office. Here's Langford.
The default is release everyone into the country. This changes the paradigm 180 degrees. When the border is being overrun, everyone is deported, but it does not address those who are currently here. That was one of the red lines that we all had at the very beginning.
Now, Senate Leader Chuck Schumer is aiming to have the first procedural vote on this border deal on Wednesday, but it's likely to stop there, Steve, because House Republican leadership has already said that they're going to kill this bill. It's dead on arrival there, calling it a non-starter. Steve?
A lot of important information there. You raised a key issue that, this has been being dubbed the sort of the bipartisan Senate border package. However, there is a lot of opposition within the Senate from Senate Republicans. So, Melina, ultimately, where does this leave aid for those other countries included in that bill, such as Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan?
So funding for those other countries, Steve, is really up in the air right now. House Speaker Mike Johnson is planning to move a standalone Israel aid package tomorrow. Remember, a few months ago, he already moved an Israel aid package, but it had pay-fors. That's why the Senate did not take it up. Now it's just a standalone package, and he's increased the money for Israel just a little bit more. But that may be an issue in the Senate. Are they willing to let go of this newly negotiated bill to take up the House's Israel aid bill? And then also for Ukraine aid, that's a sticking point within the Republican Party. Obviously, this is why we're even here at this point. The whole reason why they started these negotiations at the southern border is because of the need to get Republican support for Ukraine aid. So all of this is really up in the air as
the Communist Party. Moylan expressed frustration over the lack of support from the Biden administration.
The delegate from Guam also mentioned concerns about cybersecurity threats, with the island seeking hacking attempts by the Chinese regime. He stressed the importance of protecting the island, which is strategically crucial for the United States due to its proximity to China and hosting military bases.
Guam is the westernmost U.S. territory in the Indo-Pacific region and home to approximately 170,000 U.S. citizens. And there are nearly 7,000 active duty service members on the island. Coming up, a manipulated video of
could also codify up to 5,000 illegal crossings per day. What are some of your takeaways on this border deal, Cash?
A couple of things. One, let's start where you started, the numbers, and put this into perspective. The budget for the United States Marine Corps in 2023, the entire Marine Corps, all three divisions for 2023, was $53 billion. This bill purports to give the Ukraine, in one fell swoop, $60 billion. This prioritizes the interests of the national security defense of America and puts it in second place to those of the Ukraine. And I have always been against that. I've always been for helping our helping our allies when we can afford it after prioritizing the needs of Americans. And to me, our military comes first. And secondly, and maybe equally as important, is Joe Biden. This bill highlights the fact that we are in a political headline dispute between Congress and the White House and others, rather than actually fixing the border. Because Joe Biden could do it overnight. He came into office and rescinded at least 9 of President Trump's border security initiatives as commander-in-chief because he wanted to do the opposite of what Trump did. Look where we are now. And now what he wants to do in an election year is march out there and say, Capitol Hill, I need a bill, otherwise I can't fix anything. That's a lie. He could fix it overnight. He's got the money in the budget already that was budgeted last cycle at DHS, at FBI, and the intelligence community, DOD, etc. He just doesn't want to do it, and he wants a cheap shot political victory, and some of the morons in the Senate are looking to hand it to him.
Cash, you make a lot of excellent points. I mean, I guess the American people need to realize that there were provisions in place via executive order, many of which were rescinded as soon as President Biden entered office. So this could essentially be resolved without all of this negotiation and more money being spent via executive order.
No, you're right. And what it allows them to do is what they've always wanted to do. prioritize the needs of Ukraine and the endless war over there, over the interest of the southern border, shutting off the fentanyl that's killing our children, the narcotics traffickers and human child trafficking that is going on now in our border, along with the terrorists coming in, because it's an invasion. That's what they're prioritizing over. They are saying the Ukraine is more important, and the Washington Defense Industrial Complex and the swamp have always said that in how they speak fiscally. It's not a lie that they've given $120 billion to the Ukraine already. How much have they given of that to the border? None. It's not a lie that they want to give more to the Ukraine than they do the Marine Corps. It's not a lie that these numbers show the prioritization interests of Joe Biden, his administration, and the swamp.
Cash, former President Trump did a fascinating interview with Maria Bartiromo on Fox's Sunday Morning Futures yesterday, getting into a lot of topics that he hasn't really been talking about much lately, one of which was China and, his future China policy. I want to play a soundbite and get your reaction.
And we took in hundreds of billions of dollars in taxes through the taxes and tariffs.
Is that what you want to do again?
We have to do it. I mean, look, their stock market almost crashed when it was announced that I won the Iowa primary in a record.
Cash, why do you think China doesn't want to see former President Trump as the president again?
I think the theme of this interview today is money. And the Chinese and the CCP know that President Trump came in there with crippling tariffs and said, you must cooperate with the world order. You must not harm the interests of the United States of America and our allies overseas. And if you do, there goes the hundreds of millions of dollars of tariffs on every single Chinese import and export. That is a monumental economic strike to the CCP, and they know it's coming again should President Trump return to the Oval Office.
Cash Patel, thank you so much.
Hey, thanks. Have a great day.
To his tens, as in you're a 10 out of 10, would appear in unexpected places and show a strong interest in politicians. He suggested that such operations are orchestrated by government agencies within our own government to maintain control over members of Congress. Now, let me show you what he says exactly in that interview. Watch.
And then all of a sudden they're very interested in you. Just know that that person is probably there on purpose, and they're very good at their job, and they're trying to put you in a compromising position. And so, honeypot. Yeah, honeypot. I have found that the most common thing in Washington that is used to blackmail you for, and I can't, with whatever organization it's from, within our own government, is honeypots. Within our own government.
Now, he noted something else. We recently saw, of course, the James O'Keefe undercover video, but there was another recent story that he points to. An underground sex ring was uncovered in Washington, operating in a few different states, and the claims around it seem to align with this. Now, let me show you. This is Daily Mail. It says, intelligence experts are becoming increasingly convinced that 6 high-end brothels in the suburbs of Boston and Washington, D.C. were set up by a foreign nation as an espionage honey trap. And it says they believe the brothels, allegedly masterminded by a 41-year-old South Korean woman, targeted politicians, high-ranking government officials, and defense contractors. But it says the mystery in which countries behind the scheme, they're saying it could be Russia, China, Korea itself, or even Israel, are all seen as possibly being behind the scheme. Maybe it's all of them, they're suggesting. Now, they say this, having the Koreans out front could have been a false flag to give China or another country plausible deniability if the plot was unraveled, a one-time CIA senior operations officer told Daily Mail in an exclusive interview. In other words, they're saying even though this high-end brothel targeting politicians, contractors, and so on is their main client base, it was mainly Koreans that might have been the front in order to hide the real country that was running the operation. Now, there are actually many more warnings over blackmail being raised. In fact, Representative Tim Burchett recently claimed that honeypots were being used in Washington, echoing what we're seeing in other places, with some of these acts being secretly recorded. And then these recordings of these acts being carried out are used as leverage to control elected leaders. In other words, they're losing their independence because they're being blackmailed. And the people blackmailing them are controlling them for either foreign purposes or through some weird shadowy state within our own government.
James Martinez has the details.
It was on this street, on K Street, that former Trump official Mike Gill was shot last Monday afternoon during an attempt attacking. Mike Gill, this Sunday. The former Trump official was not the only victim of his assailant that day. 6 other people suffered attempted carjackings at gunpoint by the same man. The suspect's carjacking spree, which lasted 9 hours, is only one of 56 carjackings that has been registered in the District of Columbia since the beginning of 2024. These figures are in pace with 2023 figures that saw 958 carjackings in a single year. That's more than 2 carjackings per day. DC locals demand action from the local government and law enforcement.
DC and other cities are going through in terms of just in crime and a reduction in police officers. It's really kind of created a storm where it's been really challenging.
I think it's a multiple factors. I think the first one is sort of like the inability or the unwillingness to enforce existing laws.
Some blame U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Matthew Graves, a Biden appointee who declined to prosecute 2/3 of crimes in 2022 and 56% in 2023.
Blackmail, extortion. These are words you normally see in like fiction novels, but now there are many warnings coming out about politicians and other key people in government and business circles being blackmailed. Here's another recent story related to blackmail. The head of the National Association of Realtors stepped down, and she said it's because she's being blackmailed. Let me show you. CNN said the president of the embattled National Association of Realtors, Tracy Casper, announced on Monday she would step down, alleging blackmail, according to a statement from the association. It says Casper, who has led the nation's largest professional trade organization with 1.5 million members since August, when she took over for the former president, who resigned amid allegations of sexual harassment. People wonder if maybe it's the same thing going on with him. Informed NAR's leadership team that she recently received a threat to disclose a past personal non-financial matter unless she compromised her position at NAR, the statement said. In other words, she was being blackmailed in order to make her do something. Now it says the National Association of Realtors faced several seismic shocks over the past year, even as soaring mortgage rates dragged sales of homes in their lowest levels in years, as homebuyers faced the least affordable market in decades. And maybe this has something to do with it. Maybe somebody's trying to control real estate prices, right? It says in August, then President Kenny Pascal resigned amid sexual harassment allegations before the woman saying she's being blackmailed. These were first published in the New York Times, outlining complaints from current and former NAR employees that include inappropriate touching and sending lewd photos and texts. In the Times article, Parcell denied the accusations. He said he's innocent. At the time, CNN reached out to Parcell for comment regarding the allegations and did not hear back from him. But it notes that the new president, Casper, stepped in that point, promising to address members and all staff concerns, and of course now she's being forced out. In other words, it seems that there's maybe some individuals trying to make sure that certain people don't get into that position of power, or trying to control them if they were effectively address and counteract Iran's support for militias like the Houthis, and also, Iran itself.
Well, our former president, President Trump, really had a very successful maximum pressure, maximum sanctions campaign that did really did a couple $2 billion in international reserves. Sadly, like 60 or $70 billion in international reserves. So my advice to the U.S. and to our allies around the world that are serious about wanting to do something to hamper the Islamic Republic of Iran is it's time to go back to that maximum pressure, maximum sanctions campaign that truly was working. It was isolating the regime. But unfortunately, we're in a world today now where the Islamic Republic has grown exponentially stronger financially and also diplomatically. I mean, as you know, their ties with Russia and China are really just at an all-time high right now. So I don't know if we can put Genie back in the bottle.
Senator Ben Cardin recently had some tough words for the Hungarian government, who has a populist president, many likened to former President Trump. Why the tension, and what is the state of the Hungarian government's sentiment to the United States, and ultimately, why does this relationship matter?
Well, first, let me say that the relationship between the U.S. and Hungary most certainly does matter. Hungary has grown so much over the last couple of years, and really they're becoming a powerhouse, I think, on the world stage. With regards to what Senator Cardin said, I really think it's shameful. You know, it's shameful for the chairman of the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, who wants, or at least allegedly wants, to have stronger ties with Hungary, to be putting out statements slamming the Hungarian people and the Hungarian government. I mean, the threat that Cardin is making to remove the Hungarian people from participating in the visa waiver program is very deeply harmful to U.S.-Hungarian relations. And the ambassador on the ground here, Ambassador Pressman, in my opinion, has been really more of a political activist here in Budapest than a diplomat.
Finally, really appreciate you joining us and sharing your perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.
Some work now this past year on public schools, and we
private schools.
Excuse me, it's called private schools. Yes, yeah. Private schools, and we found schools that are $30,000 a year to $50,000 a year, and they're just as bad as any government K through 12 that we've seen.
Maybe for those of us that aren't familiar with you, some of your viewers will be from our last interview. Maybe just give me a sense of how you got into this in the first place, because I was alluding to this a little bit earlier, but you're actually your stock and trade is you're actually a magician.
I am. That's true. Yes, most of my life I spent being a professional illusionist, magician, mostly for high-end parties, corporate leaders, when they get their get-together and their suites and things like that, trade shows in Vegas and things of that nature. And I loved it. This was something that I really wanted to do since I was a little boy. It was something that I thought I would do for the rest of my life. When I moved my family from California to Indiana, I really didn't want to raise children in California. I didn't want to fight anymore. California was long gone. It was lost to me, and I didn't want to spend my life fighting. And a lot of people, until they have kids, don't really understand just how awful the crime and the schools and all those different things. So when I got to Indiana, obviously there was so much. I love Indiana, and most of these states that are red states are ran extremely well. But I saw the same seeds planted that ruined my old home. But I saw them in the schools. And so it was like watching an old movie all over again, except that I went back 20 years. I thought I had 20 years. I was wrong. Maybe had less than 10, because things move a lot. The indoctrination of children moves a lot faster now. I always say that people aren't leaving from, in the dead of night on a boat, escaping the United States to Cuba or Venezuela. So if this country goes the way it looks like it's going to go, with these systems already being torn down, with the children being weaponized, and this new Red Guard, like Mao Zedong's Red Guard being created here, there's nowhere else for my children to go. There's nowhere else for your children or anybody's children to go if America goes. And so it was the decision to focus on this rather than what I've done most of my life was not an easy one for sure. But if I'm asking parents to sacrifice, to give up things, to stand up for the children just a little bit, I felt like I had to give up something that I really loved first, so that I'm not a hypocrite. What's interesting is, for the longest time, I focused on what I was doing with Courage as a Habit, almost
matter, and one is now entirely closed. Now, he said that he had reported the extortion attempt to AMC's board, as well as law enforcement, and the perpetrator, whom he did not know, who was arrested and then sentenced in July. It says further in that Aaron's revelation came just after news about Senator published an article about him being enmeshed in what it called a catfishing scheme. The CEO, it says, sent sexually explicit images and messages in a weeks-long text exchange with a woman who tried to extort hundreds of thousands of dollars from him using fake identities. That's according to the report. The woman, Sequoia Blackwood of the Bronx, New York, was sentenced in July to time already served. Now,
That's more to it than this. There are other stories like this. Amazon's Jeff Bezos, you might have seen, claimed that he was being extorted in a very similar scandal. You might have seen as well, there was a case a few years ago where U.S. troops, American soldiers, were being blackmailed by an alleged criminal ring operating from prisons. And Elon Musk was even saying that he was being blackmailed, not sexually, but by groups instead who were manufacturing scandals about Twitter, now known as X, and then using these scandals, anti-Semitism, hate speech, and they were, of course, falsifying information, falsifying evidence, and then using this falsified evidence to go to his advertisers to try to force them to pull their businesses off of Twitter, holding these companies on censorship. Of course, he refused. There were also similar claims around the NFL and the death of NFL quarterback Dwayne Haskins. This was a couple years back. And reports 1 year after being struck by a dump truck on a highway. Questions remain the circumstances surrounding the incident. It said his family, in a statement issued, Rick alleges that the driver of the dump truck bears responsibility for the accident. And it notes that buried in the lengthy statement in a separate and eye-opening contention, they say this: it is believed that Dwayne was targeted and mugged as robbery for an expense was in him shortly. Now, of course, many of these steps. When we talk about these high-end, rings targeting politicians and influencers for blackmail, a lot of people say, well, about Jeffrey Epstein. Previous cases have been released before the one where he died or allegedly killed himself. The FBI actually released documents and information on the case when he was, of course, charged for sex trafficking of an underage girl. And it said that they had video recordings at his island on Epstein Island, this Lolita Island, recordings of sex acts. And many of the people, of course, allegedly recorded were high-ranking officials, international leaders, businessmen, and so on. And many have questioned, would Epstein have recorded these sex acts of all these world leaders? And of course, Epstein was in the news again recently, since some of the names in the court case of his associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, were actually recently unsealed. Now, just a few months ago, before, during the discussions on Epstein, the issue of political blackmail was being brought up again, related to Epstein. And Republican Congressman Tim Burchett claimed that honeypots were being used in Washington, that some of these acts are secretly being recorded, just like the Epstein allegations, and that these recordings are being used as leverage to then control our elected leaders. Now, the UK Independent said this: the redacted names will include sex abuse victims, Epstein's former employees, and witnesses who helped to build the case against the now-dead financier. Many of the names and Epstein's flight log were already public to an extent. It notes that Johnson noted that Mr. Burchett had called for the names to be revealed in the House of Representatives, and intimated that lawmakers were trying to hide their complicity by opposing the release of the information. In other words, he was saying that the elected officials we have who are trying to stop the Epstein documents from being made public, that these people may be trying to hide their complicity in it. Now let me show you, it says this: it seems like now you are fighting with her in the House. Why the protection mechanism? And more importantly, you mentioned recently in an interview that there may be some members of Congress who are personally compromised by this and that they don't want the truth to get out. Can you expand on that? This is Johnson asking Mr. Burchett. And Mr. Burchett then proceeded to weave a tale of enticement, deceit, and blackmail that he believes secretly controls the votes of lawmakers. And he claims that elite power brokers in Washington, D.C., quote, use the old honeypot to gain leverage over lawmakers and force them to vote for, quote, crazy stuff.
heads into 2024.
Another worrisome statistic for the Chinese economy is also making the rounds. That is, in the third quarter, foreign direct investment went into the negative. According to a Friday report from the International Monetary Fund, China's GDP growth could drop to the 3% range between this year and next year, based on the current trend. The Shanghai Benchmark Index saw its worst week in 5 years Friday. Stocks tumbled, closing 1.5% lower. The drop comes amid signs of panic selling. That's as authorities remain cautious about injecting a major stimulus to boost the economy, disappointing investors.
Aligns with what we hear about Jeffrey Epstein. What he is saying aligns with what Madison Cawthorn said. What he is saying aligns with what James O'Keefe just revealed in this undercover recording. We are getting evidence now from multiple sources, many claims, and yes, those do count as evidence, especially from the people they're coming from, that our elected officials are being secretly controlled. And on the note of Epstein, the people around him, the nature and case, also led to suspicions around his death, and also the suicides of other people who were very close to the case. Now, there are other similar cases to this, which of course has many people questioning these things in many ways. But back to the issue of blackmail and the alleged use of people using compromising photos and other forms of leverage, including, for example, the sex trafficking of underage children, which is, of course, what the Jeffrey Epstein case was about. In the context of all of this, there were also the actions of President Joe Biden in 2022 to create restrictions on posting nude photos of people without their consent and using this, of course, allegedly to blackmail them. Now, this was, of course, framed in the context of his son, Hunter Biden, who was, of course, having many scandals because Hunter Biden was kind of like, people don't even need to blackmail. He was kind of doing it to himself. Hunter Biden has a weird thing of taking photos of himself, doing drugs and doing push-ups, naked, doing between his desk and a couch and weird things like that. But the actions could also limit the use of blackmail material. In other words, what Biden did is not limited to just maybe preventing some of these images of Hunter Biden being released. It could actually relate to some of these other forms of extortion and blackmail. Washington Examiner said this: President Joe Biden laid out the bare facts about nude photos, striking an odd note when discussing non-consensual pornography on Wednesday. It says Biden commented that, quote, everybody knows somebody, everybody apparently knows somebody, who has had a revealing picture used as blackmail or in other non-consensual ways, the latest in a string of verbal missteps are saying. And he said, I bet everybody knows somebody somewhere along the line. In an intimate relationship, what happened was the guy takes a revealing picture of his naked friend or whatever in a compromising position and then literally sends blackmail. They're saying Biden said this in a signing ceremony of the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. Now, take it as you will. The way that the article was framed, and of course Biden's new law was framed, is always just trying to protect Hunter Biden. But actually, I think he's saying something real here. That there are people taking compromising photographs of people in Washington especially, and then using the photographs or videos to blackmail them. Now, of course, given that law, there are now criminal violations if a person posts images or videos of somebody without their consent of that nature. But I think this raises something much deeper, that there are groups trying to control our elected leaders. Now, folks, that's all for tonight. Thank you for joining us, and as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.